appointments at Princeton, Cambridge, Harvard, and the Naval Academy, among others. The BBC called him the world's most influential authority on contemporary Islam. He's won a number of international peace awards, including Pakistan's Star of Excellence and the Gandhi Peace Award. You can see that he's a filmmaker, as well as an author and scholar and researcher, poet. He's had anthologies of poetry published, and I say that he has, I've told him this, that you have a heart of a mystic. We're really just delighted to have Dr. Ahmed here with us tonight, and Dr. Ahmed, you honor us with your presence. So please give a warm Fort Wayne welcome to Ambassador Dr. Akbar Ahmed. He always likes images, so we're going to get a quick picture with the crowd.
We are immortalizing you. Michael, thank you so much for inviting me here, for allowing me to meet this wonderful community. In a sense, you really are the gems and jewels of society. Not many people know of the kind of work you're doing, but to me, an outsider, I find it very, very enlightening, very heartening, in a time when this kind of work is not very well known, and therefore does not contribute to the public debate. I've discovered in this very short trip to Fort Wayne the range of people who live here, the backgrounds, the intellectual powerhouse that you are. We've had discussions over breakfast, over lunch, now over dinner. And the range, the scope, we have Afghans and we have Pakistanis and we have people from the Plymouth Church. Plymouth, just the word Plymouth is so evocative. And of course we have Michael's son Andrew, who in fact was the first person who approached me to come here and persuaded me, and I'm glad I was persuaded because I've really enjoyed this trip. So thank you so much, thank you all for coming here and making this such a great occasion. I hope you enjoyed the film. I have recommended to Michael that he could perhaps show you the whole film, and that would make more sense because you just saw a little clip. So let me begin my talk with a few remarks. My talk really begins with 9/11. I had just joined American University, literally a week earlier. I was in class talking to a group of young students who looked at me blankly, wondering who this guy was, wondering why they should even be in my class, because I was completely new. No one knew me, I didn't know anyone. When the plane flew into the Pentagon, now I've spent a lot of my time as an administrator in Pakistan, on the borders of Afghanistan and Pakistan. And Dr. Akbar here will tell you what Waziristan means. It sends shivers down the spines of most Pakistanis. Would you agree with that, Dr. Saab? Yes? Because it's a lawless area, and it is the most lawless area in Pakistan, Waziristan. So I've lived life as an administrator in a practical way. And I knew that 9/11 meant two things. Number one, it meant immediate pressure on Muslims. Because most Americans who I knew, I've known Americans for decades. I was at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton in 1980. So I have a very good idea of American culture and Americans. And Americans had not really engaged with Islam in the way that they've engaged with, say, South Americans. Would you agree, Terry? There's not that kind of engagement that you have with South America. So when 9/11 happened, I knew that most Americans are going to be puzzled, going to be angry, and they will be talking of retribution, revenge, anger. I also knew the Muslim community. I'm part of that community. And I knew that while most Muslims, I would say almost all Muslims I knew, were good citizens. They came here by choice. It was their choice to come here. And they wanted to be American, to contribute to this society. I also knew that the sociological pattern was that they invested in sending their kids to become doctors, engineers, lawyers. The reason being, that was where the money was. So their attitude very much was, we're here, we'll become married, we'll live the American dream, and that's that. And we accept it. We accept your doctor or your oncologist or your dentist. You're not going to start asking questions when you're strapped up in one of those chairs. So no one is going to debate who the doctor is. But 9/11 opened up that question. Who is your doctor? Where is he coming from? What is this religion he practices? Is it about the terrorists next door? What is going on? These questions were coming up. The President of the United States asked, why do they hate us? And you couldn't ignore this. This is the President of the United States. So the next question was to myself, what could I, with my experience of both communities, do in this situation? One ordinary scholar on a campus. And I really felt that what we could do, every Muslim, to act and become a bridge, to become an ambassador, to go out to the communities and really begin to understand the community and then help them reach out. As best they could, maybe 5 people, 10 people, 100 people, but sooner or later that would start having an impact. It was a very ambitious scheme and I launched it. So in effect, I launched a project which took me more than a decade, and I wasn't alone. I took my wonderful American students like Frankie Martin, my honor student, who joined me enthusiastically with all his intelligence and commitment. And these wonderful young Americans helped me to see this problem from their fresh eyes. And we had a whole list of questions that we asked people as we traveled. So the first project took us to the Muslim world, where we asked Muslims in Turkey, in Pakistan, in India, and Indonesia, right across the Muslim world. What does it mean to be a Muslim and why do you dislike America? What is your complaint regarding America? And they had a long list. One of the top complaints was that America disrespected Islam. I found that very interesting. This came up in Turkey, in Jordan, in Pakistan, consistently. America insults and humiliates Islam. All right, we are scholars. We are there to take notes, not to change minds. We just take notes because we are doing a scholarly study. Next round, I decided that we must do the same study, this time travel in America, and ask Americans the same questions. What is your problem with the Muslim world? What do you know about Islam? What do you think about Islam? And as you know, many Americans will have some very serious reservations about Islam, which they express. And we went to, as Michael said, 75 cities over 1 year. And believe me, 75 cities is a very exhausting schedule by any standards. And we were on the go non-stop. We literally arrived in a town. For the next 5 days, we'd have, my team would be going, women going into the women's groups, and men going into mosques, talking to imams, and chasing up leads, finding out research, talking to editors, congressmen, just non-stop. We went to the biggest mosque in New York, we went to the furthest mosque in the West, in Hawaii, Honolulu. And the editor of the local paper rang me up and said, why are you here, Professor? So I said, I'm here to look at your Muslim community, to study them. And he said, Muslims? We have Muslims on the island? I said, yes. We have 5 mosques here. And he said, 5 mosques? He didn't know this was the editor. I said, I was going to ask you for information, but you seem to be asking me. I'm just visiting for the first time. So it was fascinating, this trip, where it was telling us about America today. Memphis, where the great Elvis Presley is from, and his Wasteland and so on. So we went there, and in the morning I was on one of these chat shows, very amiable pair, and we were chatting, and they said, why are you here? And I said, I'm here, of course, to pay homage to the king. And they thought I was looking for the king. I said, Elvis, You mean you've heard of it in Pakistan? I said, yes, we have. We're not really living in the jungles anymore. So he then said, but seriously, why are you here? And I said, I'm here to study the Muslim community. It's on live TV, and he said, what, there are Muslims here? I said, yes, there are. There are again 6 mosques here. And in fact, after my talk with you, I'm going straight to the central mosque. I'm going to say my prayers there. Now in the meantime, some Muslims had been following this, and they heard this or saw this. And Muslims are basically very hospitable people, as you may have gathered. So a lot of Muslims prepared meals and rushed to the main mosque with dishes of food. So we had Pakistani dishes and Afghan dishes and Syrian dishes. People went there to welcome us and asked us to join them for lunch. Now this trip also allowed us to get an idea of the complexity of the Muslim community. And this is how I divided it. Think about it. You've got this vast continent, a vast community spread over a continent. How are you going to study it? The traditional anthropologist goes to a village, sits in the village for a couple of years, and writes his monograph on that village. I'm talking about a continent. So you have to have elements of the road. The Americans are very fond of the road, songs, the books, the films on the journeys, the road trips on motorbikes or buses or cars. But we wanted to be scientific. So I said we divide it into 3, very broadly, 3 broad communities. Number 1, the African Americans, who I called the first Muslims. Because the African Americans are the first Muslims of America. They came here first, they maintained their Islam. Initially it was difficult, but eventually they triumphed, and they produced some of the most famous Americans, who happen to be African American, but Americans. Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Waris Deen Muhammad. These are legendary figures. And we were very privileged to meet them, talk to them, interview them. The last, for example, Waris Deen Muhammad, W.D. Muhammad. Who in this great audience has heard of W.D. Muhammad? Put up your hands, please. 3 people, 4 people, 5. And I suspect all Muslim. Now the rest of you, I would urge you, it's not a plug for my book, but do read the book. It's got a lot of information on W.D. Muhammad. But W.D. is the Martin Luther in the Christian sense of Islam in America. He literally changed the direction of Islam in the United States. And had he not lived, 9/11 and afterwards would have been a very different affair. It's W.D. who brought in compassion and inclusivity into Islam. And he then created a whole series of mosques throughout America. And you can go to any mosque and say, is this a W.D. Muhammad mosque? And if they say yes, you'll find a welcome, a warm welcome. It's W.D. Muhammad. And he was the son of Elijah Muhammad, the man who led the nation of Islam. Can you hear me all right at the back? So here are the African Americans. And we interviewed right across the United States, and we met some very inspiring imams. And again, we learned so much about America, because the African Americans would say, we are Americans and we are proud of being Americans. We don't want your culture. Maybe we may have a relationship because we are both Muslim, but we don't want your culture here. You have issues like the Arabs come to America and they talk about Palestine. The Pakistanis come and for them Kashmir is the issue. Those are problems you have back home. Here we have issues of education, of health, of the issues that you hear about in the papers daily. Problems with law and order and so on. But their stories were so inspiring. We met Imam Hassan in Las Vegas. Think of it, Las Vegas. Very impressive man, very humble, quiet, ran a mosque. And my team, my American team, were fascinated by him. Because we were amazed as to how an African American becomes an imam and is in Las Vegas. So we asked him, he said, how do you find yourself here in Sin City? And he said, you know, I worked in a hotel as a bellboy. I would take the luggage, I would take the suitcase, of the guest and take it up to the floor, 20th floor, 30th floor. And as I would go up, I would read one verse of the Quran. And as I came down, I would read another verse. That way I learned the entire Quran. And to me that's incredibly inspiring. That is commitment. I think a lot of us immigrants, or much better off, would learn a great deal from that humble Imam. And talking of Imams, we have one Imam walking up. Imam, come in please. Come and join us. And Imam, I don't want to say late as always. Please come and sit here and join us here in front.
Yes.
So here we have Imam Hassan. Not the Imam who just walked in, but the Imam I'm talking about. And Imam Hassan then tells me the story of how he converted to Islam. And again, a very inspiring story. So he wasn't just someone who was walking along, he said, one day I'll become a Muslim. He said, I am from Detroit. And I spent a lot of my time trying to discover God. So I went to a synagogue, I talked to rabbis, I read books, I went to churches, I met priests, I read about Christianity, but nothing satisfied me. And then someone gave me the Quran. And I didn't suddenly say I'm a Muslim. He said, I studied the Quran. And I said, this is exactly what I want. So I said, yes, but you're in Sin City or Las Vegas. And he said, do you realize this is exactly the circumstances of the Prophet of Islam who brought religion, the Islamic religion to the world. He was surrounded with drunken, whoring tribesmen. No rules, misogyny, they would bury women, infants. And yet, the Prophet brought Islam to that people. He said, for me it's exactly the same. If I can bring some goodness, some compassion to the people of Las Vegas, that would be my contribution. Again, I thought that was a very interesting comparison in his mind. We went to Sapelo Island in the Atlantic Ocean, a tiny little place. You may not have heard of it. And we met the legendary Mrs. Bailey. Now, Mrs. Bailey is African American, the child of slaves. And on that little island, she said, this is an African American slave island. This is where they kept the slaves. And she said, we were Muslim. So I said, what evidence do you have you're Muslim? As an anthropologist, I was fascinated. And she recounted 22 pieces of evidence, even as Christians. You know, sociologically, you can't wipe out culture overnight. And she went through a whole list. For example, she said, when we enter a church, men go to one side, women the other side. That's not Christianity. When we enter a church, we take off our shoes. When we enter a church, we put on a scarf. When we are buried facing the east. I mean, these are remarkable pieces of evidence of her background. She was telling us very proudly. So I said, what does Islam mean to you? You're a priest. She's a pastor of the church, the African American church. And she said, Islam to me is like my right hand. If it's taken away from me, it's like cutting my right hand. So I said, but you're not even a Muslim. She said, that's my inheritance, it's my legacy. And she said, my grandmother would say, Christian by day, Muslim by night. And it's a very profound saying that, you know, they give us a lot to think about. It's very deep, and it's rich with potential for research. Well, then we went on and met the immigrant community, the second category. African Americans first, the immigrant community second. And in the immigrant community you have Arabs, you have Afghans, Turks, Pakistanis, Indians, Bengalis, a whole range of people, the immigrants. And many of them came to America in the middle class, especially the Pakistani doctors, for example. So they flew in, many of them came in the 80s, 90s, and they just came in, joined a university, joined a hospital, and very quickly they were part of society, and respectable. They were respected and respectable members of society. They were part of the American dream. They lived well, they had big houses, vehicles, and so on. But when 9/11 happened again, no one really knew who they were. No one knew their culture, their history, how many films had they made, how many documentaries had they made, how many books had they written, none. very, very limited. All their investment was in working hard and making money. So suddenly they were in a position of having to scurry around and try to explain themselves. And at the same time, because the Arabs came from the Middle East, they assumed the leadership of the community. And people resented that, especially the African Americans. Because the African Americans said, wait a minute, you may be Muslim and we may be Muslim, but we don't want to hear criticism of America. We are Americans. These are our movies. We love baseball and basketball. These are our sports. These are customs. So we may be devoted to Islam and we love the Prophet and so on, but we have our own culture. So we are good Americans, we are also good Muslims. This again was an interesting dilemma and discussion between the two communities. The Arabs, of course, because they have the language, they understood Islam perhaps the best because they come from the area, the peninsula where the Prophet, the Quran was revealed to the Prophet. But here it was a different matter because it was a question of how many men do you have in your mosque? How many people do you have in your congregation? It was a kind of game of numbers. And that's why the African Americans are number one in terms of the congregation. I think it's about 33%. And then there's immigrants are divided between these other communities. And the Arabs are something like 22% of the Muslim world. About 300 million people. It's a vast area. It's a very important part of the Muslim world. And there are about 22 countries, and all of them were represented. So we met Egyptians, and Libyans, and Tunisians, the whole range, and Arabs. Now, the third category of Muslims in America. So we have two so far. We've got the African Americans, we've got the immigrants, and now we are going to talk about the third category. And can anyone guess what the third category is? Terry, take a shot.
Refugee, converted, yeah.
Converts. Who said converts? Good. So you've got the converts.
Buggers.
Who?
You say buggers, right?
Who?
Buggers?
Boggers?
Yeah. I don't know what you're saying about.
No, we are talking of converts.
Converse, right.
Okay.
Yes. So converts, Latinos, white folk, people who are converting. And I found this category fascinating. The reason being, as an anthropologist, I asked myself, why are Americans converting to Islam? Here's the richest, most literate, educated community perhaps in the world. And yet people are converting to Islam, which is under so much pressure. You have all this negativity around it in the media, channels are spewing out hatred, and suddenly people are converting. And what amazed me was that in those numbers of conversions, women were 4 out of 5 of the converts. How do you explain that? And I said to myself, the freest women in the world are probably American women. And they really are the freest. And these women are converting. And in their conversion, they're giving up so much. They're giving up their freedom, how to dress, how to wear, how to behave. Because Islam, just like all faiths, have certain regulations, certain